Welcome to Shaped by Faith with your host, Theresa Rowe. To find out more about Shaped by Faith and Theresa Rowe, please visit shapedbyfaith.com or visit the YouTube channel, Facebook, or Instagram. And now, here is Theresa Rowe.
Welcome to Shaped by Faith. I'm your host, Theresa Rowe. As we begin today's Shaped by Faith episode, it's important to recognize that September is National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. It's a time to honor those affected by suicide, raise awareness, and connect individuals with life-saving hope and treatment. So my prayer today is that this conversation will equip and encourage you to be a light in someone's darkness. I'm joined by two amazing women. They're exceptional. They bring their faith and they bring their professional expertise, personal insight, and spiritual wisdom to this conversation. So Suzanne Craig is in the blue. She's a program manager for the Community Access Projects with the Green River District Health Department. She leads programs that serve vulnerable communities across Kentucky. She's also an ordained minister, hospital chaplain with a special calling to walk alongside those experiencing grief. And Suzanne's leadership in public health includes grant writing, nonprofit innovation, and systems-wide care access, making her a trusted and compassionate voice in our region. And she's a dear friend. And Dr. Melinda Moore is a licensed psychologist and a professor at Eastern Kentucky University, where she teaches in the clinical psychology doctoral program. She also sees clients in her private practice in Lexington, Kentucky. Dr. Moore specializes in suicide prevention and grief training, clinicians in CAMS treatment mold. Her work is personal, rooted in her own loss, and she's co-authored two powerful books on faith, healing, and life after suicide. Welcome, ladies, to Shaped by Faith.
Welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Absolutely. I want to ask you right away, what inspired each of you to step into this vital and emotional demanding work of suicide prevention? And then how has your personal experience of faith journey influenced your commitment?
I'll let you go first, Dr. Moore.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I actually had a personal experience with suicide that coincides with my faith journey. I was a new Catholic several decades ago. When I lost my husband, we were newly married, to suicide. And I was actually headed to a career in medicine at the time. And I was working in public health, loved public health, but I wanted to be on the clinical end of healthcare. And actually, when he died by suicide, I began learning everything I could about suicide prevention. This was a term I had not used or had ever heard of before, working in public health. And I would have to say that because suicide is such a stigmatized cause of death, I was very isolated and alone in this experience of loss, but what I did have was my faith. And I had going to Mass every week and really, merging my suffering, tremendous suffering, with Christ on the cross. And that's really how those two kind of came together and converged and have landed me where I'm at today.
Thank you so much. Suzanne, what about you?
That I was lucky enough to be married to a wonderful man, Ted, for 15 years. And we had two beautiful daughters, but he did take his life, unfortunately, in 2007. And that really took me on a journey. At the time, I was a mental health therapist for quite some time. And that really took me on a journey of really trying to seek answers, seek understanding. That I found myself really zigzag emotionally of questioning God and wondering why, sometimes feeling like God abandoned me, even though I don't feel that way anymore. And so really it took me on a faith journey that was in some ways arm's length from God when it first happened, if I'm honest, to a real close personal relationship now. Mm. And so I'm so grateful to now I can actually say I'm grateful for that experience because it's so much more rich and beautiful, that relationship I have now.
Thank you so much, both of you. Now, Dr. Moore and Suzanne, suicide has often been framed as a sin or a moral failure. So where do those beliefs originate, and how can we shift the conversation towards one that reflects God's mercy and grace?
Actually, the Vatican II in the 60s began that shift. Unfortunately, the translation into faith communities, at least in the Catholic Church, has been really slow going. A lot of priests seem to have not gotten the memo yet about Vatican II and the change in the stance on suicide in the catechism. The early Christians didn't believe it was an unforgivable sin, but when St. Augustine began writing about suicide and likening it to self-murder and likening it to the sixth commandment, thou shalt not murder, and then St. Thomas Aquinas also kind of solidified that idea. For hundreds of years in Christianity, we saw suicide as an unforgivable sin, and that's not true. Now, it's not that we want to endorse suicide, but I think the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and this is reverberated in all sorts of faith communities, seeing it as a grave psychological disturbance that mitigates the responsibility of the individual. So we now understand there are psychological reasons why people engage in behaviors such as suicide, and that it's not a moral failing. It's really a matter of psychological disturbance.
Suzanne, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to you with this next question.
Sure.
In your role with the Green River District Health Department, how do you approach suicide-related issues in a public health setting, and what gaps do you see in community understanding?
Thank you. I appreciate the question because I take my role at the health department very serious. And one of the things that's important to know, if I asked you, Theresa, I'm putting you on the spot because you're my friend and I love doing that. So if you could tell me, name any kind of health condition you could think of.
Like a physical, like
Yes, a
heart,
physical health.
like if I had
Yes,
something wrong with my
exactly.
heart.
And you're good. And that's number one cause of death. But do you know suicide is the 11th cause of death? And if we add in the statistics of how many people are going to the emergency room with self-harm, if we add in the people who think about it, the people who plan it. So please know that when it's the 11th cause of death, those are those who've taken their life. And so we know at any given year about 50,000 people take their life. And imagine that's the size of Owensboro. We're about 50,000 strong. And imagine if tomorrow everyone in Owensboro took their life, how dramatic that would seem. Well, that's what's happening now. And if we look at, that's just looking at it in a very drop in the bucket. If we look at it worldwide, the problem is even bigger. If we look at it on a worldwide public health perspective. And so more people are dying of suicide worldwide than HIV, malaria, and breast cancer.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so,
Go ahead, Suzanne. Sorry.
and so if we know those are problems and we know that those are serious problems, but a lot of people don't understand the seriousness of suicide as the big picture and small picture of the problem statistically.
That's so true. I hadn't thought about it like that. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Now, this is to both of you. Stigma continues to silence people in crisis, obviously. So what are some of the long-term consequences of this stigma, and how can we begin dismantling it in both faith and professional spheres of influence?
Stigma is seen as kind of a combination of fear and ignorance. Now, the fear of suicide is not a bad thing. We want to stay fearful of suicide, but the ignorance around suicide is the problem long term. And this kind of silence around it just perpetuates suicide. People feel, if they're in themselves in crisis, they may not seek help. They may end up engaging in behaviors. They may end up dying by suicide. And then, of course, those who are left behind in the wake, such as Suzanne and me, we oftentimes, it seems, share in the taint of that. And that's stigma. I think what we have to do is we have to be fearless and recognize that we now have a new science around this cause of death, around this behavior, and around this experience of loss. There's a lot more of us than we realize. And that's why I think it's important to show leadership, to talk about it publicly, to advocate to public health folks like Suzanne and others, that we must be doing something about this publicly, but then also privately, whether it's in faith communities, other places, because faith communities can be some of the best suicide prevention partners anywhere. Folks would rather speak to clergy about their mental health issues than talk to somebody like me. So we have to equip clergy, lay faith leaders, how to talk to folks in their communities about this problem and about the shame and the stigma around it.
What scientific knowledge should people of faith and the general public understand about suicide, mental illness, and prevention?
Yeah, wow, that's a big
I
question.
know.
Uh, Suzanne has already referenced the fact that 50,000 Americans die by suicide every year. About 800 Kentuckians die by suicide every year. That's a huge number. I mean, huge number nationally, a huge number in Kentucky. And what we have is we have a new science around suicide. So we understand it so much better. We understand how to assess, how to intervene, how to manage, but also the science of data collection, which I'm sure Suzanne can go on and on about in terms of how that works. But what we know is that it's usually in the top 10 leading causes of death. It's been knocked out because of COVID, but I'm sure it's the one cause of death that's in the top leading causes of death that is not static, it's fluid, and it's been a problem for about 50 years. But like I said, the science around this is pretty new. What we also know is that for every death by suicide, there are 135 people who are exposed to that death. Now, these are not necessarily people who are close to them, people that they go to church with, they're neighbors with, they've gone to school with, that kind of thing. But then for every person who dies, there's about 36% or 48 individuals who feel close or very close to that individual who's died by suicide. And that's problematic because we know that being emotionally close to somebody who's died by suicide confers risk. So we know those people have higher levels of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempt. So it's almost like suicide begets more suicide. We have to take this very, very seriously. Like I said, because of the science around this, we know so much more. But we also have resources like the phenomenal National Suicide and Crisis Line number 988. We also have interventions. I mean, I work for a company called CAMS Care, and on CAMS Care, we have a clinician locator where you can find a clinician in your state who can actually treat suicide. So we've got a lot of resources, too many to name. I'm sure you'll have them on your website, Theresa, and I'm always available to help, give a resource to somebody.
Okay, thank you so much. Suzanne, you manage and you lead large-scale public health initiatives across multiple counties. So, what are some successful community-based models or strategies that you've seen for suicide prevention?
Well, I think 988 is absolutely life-changing. We know that a lot of people, even in the faith-based community and in the community at large, still don't know about 988. And so I've been very amazed at such an easy resource. Obvious resource is mental health therapy, but there are some people who are evidence-based trained with suicide prevention, and a lot of people in the community don't know those resources. And so some therapists try to treat it as just a loss. I don't want to say just a loss, but that's often the model of grief that some therapists, old school therapists, try to treat it as, but it's also a trauma. And if you forget that part, you might leave someone with a lot of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and you might leave someone worse for wear. And so we're learning a lot, as Dr. Moore said, is that we used to be in the dark ages of suicide and we treat it just like grief. And it is a grief, but it's also a very specific, intense trauma. And so that's so important to treat it as such. And so like outstanding professionals like Dr. Moore, but then there are many in our community that use those evidence-based practices that can help, and just getting help. And if I'm honest, I'll just be transparent for a moment, is that I didn't seek help fast enough. I sought help and it wasn't very effective because it was treated as grief. And so in some ways it deepened my sadness. And so I just kind of gave up on therapy. But honestly, it was getting connected with the right professional that made all the difference in the world, that really helped with my personal grief and with my personal trauma related to. And so it made the biggest difference. And it's even trickled down to my kids, to my family, where it's made a difference to them too, that they talk about it. We have rituals now where we go to the cemetery. I couldn't even go to the cemetery before. And so now we have rituals where we can do that. And it's all because we got connected with the right individual. And so it's not just benefiting the individual, you're benefiting families, those others that are close to them when you get good treatment.
That is so good. And Suzanne, just briefly, I remember meeting you for the first time
Mhm. Yes.
right after that. And I was going through my own trauma, getting ready to go
Mhm.
through open heart surgery. And I mean, both of us were going through uh it seemed trauma. I mean, you could probably sense it in me and I could sense it in you. And I think that's how we became friends,
Well,
you
if
know.
I'm honest, how we became friends is that I was taping a box to put food in it, and you decided, you looked over at me, you kept corner eyeing me, and I said, "What? I'm not taping this straight enough." And you're like, "No, you're not. It's getting on my nerves." So then I knew I could always trust that you would give me the honest opinion and vice versa. So that's the thing I appreciate about you, is that you are honest to your core, and you're trustworthy. Your words are important to me.
Well, I appreciate that. I feel the same about you. Now, this is to both of you. Language matters deeply, and I'm so glad that you actually sent me the language guidelines because um, I didn't know exactly what the language or the phrases to use. Can you explain committed suicide, why this term is outdated, and what language we actually should be using instead?
Yeah, along with the new science around suicide, we have a nomenclature. We're talking about things more descriptively. We're being more specific. And when you
Hmm.
say somebody committed suicide, why committed suicide is considered passé is because it suggests they've either committed a crime or committed a sin. And
Hmm.
neither one of those are true.
Hmm.
And and not only that, but it perpetuates the stigma around suicide. It reduces help seeking for people who hear that term and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm participating in a crime." And so we want to encourage people to be help seeking, but we also want to be descriptive of what has happened when somebody has died by suicide. So we use terms like died by suicide. A friend of mine who is the suicide prevention coordinator for the state of Kentucky actually says that if you can use the word cancer in the sentence, then it fits for suicide. So somebody dies
Hmm.
by cancer, right? Cancer
Yes.
kills somebody, right? You can then substitute suicide. But we don't suggest that people are engaging in crime or a sin, and we certainly don't want to perpetuate stigma among the people who are bereaved, because when you say committed suicide, it also helps perpetuate that stigma.
That is so good. I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's very helpful for me and for everyone else who's out there listening. There's often tension between clinical models and faith traditions, and you just brought that up. So, how can public health professionals and spiritual leaders partner together without compromising their roles?
Well, I think I could talk from the public health perspective and the minister role. But I think Dr. Moore has done some awesome research and some awesome work around how the faith-based community can be a part of the solution to part of this problem. As Dr. Moore, I think, once told me, she said that the faith-based community can be gatekeepers.
Hmm.
Often that people in the congregation, they handle a lot of pain, and people will often go to them before they will even a psychologist, or before they will talk to a public health person. And so and maybe before they would even tell a friend. And so it's real important for the faith at the faith-based community level is that those individuals of knowing when to refer, knowing what is their lane, what is so important, and what are those resources. And so we hope that people in the audience pick up on some of the resources that we're discussing today, so that whatever congregation people are in, or if ministers are listening, that they would know that there are resources out there and when to refer, because that is so deeply important. And we as a faith-based community, that not only does the language matter, but our interventions matter. We could save
Hmm.
a life just by showing compassion and being trustworthy, and not having the stigma around suicide. I remember after Ted died, for years, if someone asked how he died, I just said it was sudden. Thank you for your concern.
Hmm.
Because there was so much stigma around it. I didn't want to be asked questions that I was asked, like, "I thought your marriage was so strong," or "I thought he was a Christian." And so I
Hmm.
didn't want to be asked those questions. So I learned for many years, of just saying it was sudden. And that's the stigma that I'm talking about.
Right.
And and it keeps other suicide bereaved people sometimes from meeting other suicide bereaved people that could be support. Because if you're not even willing to admit it to others, I found once I became transparent in admitting that I was a suicide bereaved individual, I had so many people say, "Me too, me too,
Wow.
thank you, me too." And so that honesty is important in terms of being a witness in the congregation. From a public health perspective, how they can work with is for them to know the data, not only know the resources, but know how big the problem is. And I guarantee if I ask some ministers how big of a problem is suicide, I'm like, oh, it's not a huge problem. I never had anybody in my congregation die of suicide. They don't even know how many sometimes suicide bereaved individuals are sitting in their audience.
So
Uh,
true.
and so we know it's a problem based on the statistics. And so I think that I love the work. I'd like Dr. Moore to talk a little bit about the work she's doing with the faith-based community because I think it inspires me.
I want you to address what resources are available and anything else that you want to mention at this time.
Yeah. Faith communities have been given a little bit of a shot in the arm in terms of awareness that they are tremendous suicide prevention partners, also suicide postvention partners. There's a wonderful organization called the Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers, founded by Deacon Ed Schoner and Bishop John Dolan, both survivors of suicide loss, that create a template for mental health ministries within Catholic congregations. But really, this is a template that can be used across any Christian, denomination or community. They have also written 2 books, one for suicide bereaved, but then also for faith leaders. How do you think about this? How do you think about this cause of death, and how do you address it from the funeral? I've also been involved with Rabbi Dan Roberts in a book called The Suicide Funeral, where we talk about how do you handle, as a clergy member, how do you handle the funeral of somebody who's died by suicide? But also, if you're a person of faith, how do you think about it? There's also tremendous resources through Kay Warren's website. Just Google Kay Warren. She's got amazing resources around grief, but then also suicide loss. Of course, she and Rick Warren lost their son Matthew about 11 years ago to suicide, and he has preached on this. There are YouTube videos, tremendous resources around suicide loss through Rick and Kay Warren. So I think that there's a lot of faith-based resources. We just don't know about them. There's also another wonderful community in Atlanta called One Lamb. So there are lots of different communities out there of faith that are doing things in the suicide prevention and postvention realm that I think they can be availed by anybody across the country.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a very simple question to both of you. If someone knows someone, a friend that is contemplating suicide, and that friend is uncomfortable, and they don't know what to say, what advice would you give to that friend?
Well, I think listen with compassion, but then get a professional involved. And so 988 is a good hotline. Sometimes it's in the middle of the night and it's hard to get an assessment in the middle of the night, but you can talk to somebody who's going to be compassionate and knowledgeable on the other side. And but knowing what your lane is and knowing that you're a friend, not a professional, and you not to take responsibility for that. And I think that that's so key in that. And but also following through with that. Is sometimes some people are scared to say, "Are you thinking about taking your life?" because they think it puts it in someone's head, and we know that's not the case. Asking the question, "Are you thinking about taking your life?" It's okay to ask that question and then acting accordingly.
That's good advice. Suzanne, you've supported individuals and families through hospice care, through, the hospital and community leadership. So what does compassionate care look like after someone has died by suicide?
I think I can't say enough. I know I've mentioned this at least 5 different times as being a compassionate listener. That's the grandest thing you could do when somebody is grief stricken. They want to talk about their loved ones, and treating it without the stigma helps people to do that. That I know that as a being a part of the faith-based community, that half of what I do is listening and showing compassion. People need to know they're not alone, and that someone cares about them. I wished I had like a magic bullet that would make all the grief go away. But honestly, from my perspective, and also getting people the help that they need early on so they don't have to suffer, and getting them involved in groups, support groups, hospice, and many of the funeral homes have really good support groups and counselors associated with the funeral homes, and getting people that early care could be so key.
That's so good. So, Dr. Moore, what have you learned about the healing process, especially for those walking through intense grief?
Yeah. So, as Suzanne said earlier, grief and trauma are two different things. You have to really address the trauma before you can address the grief. And I think the grief is a lifelong process. It changes as we move through life and go through different chapters of, the book of our life. But I would have to say just being open and being willing to address it, because it's going to be a suicide loss is probably going to be something, particularly if somebody close to you, it's going to be something that you're going to have for the rest of your life. It does not have to, though, define your life or the life of the person who died by suicide. But I think addressing it in therapy with somebody who's competent to treat it is really important. And then aligning yourself with organizations and people who get it. So this whole idea of connecting with a community of support. There is a beautiful national organization called the Alliance of Hope. It's an online virtual organization, so you can connect from wherever you live. Also, there are suicide bereavement groups. Locally, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has a list of those on their website. And then, of course, the Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers. Many of these organizations that are in Catholic communities across the country also have suicide bereavement groups. I run one through the Cathedral of Christ the King here in Lexington, in the Diocese of Lexington. So I know they're in there other places in other parts of the United States.
Thank you so much. We could go on and on. Our time is up, and I apologize. I wish we could go on, maybe, a second show. But Suzanne, thank you. Dr. Melinda Moore, thank you both for the work that you're doing, and God bless you both.
Thank you for caring about this topic, Theresa. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you for listening. I'm Theresa Rowe. Everyone have a blessed day. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Shaped by Faith with Theresa Rowe. Remember to visit shapedbyfaith.com to find out more about workouts, the TV show, podcasts, blogs, Shaped by Faith products, and much more.